You should be able to hear me now. I think so. Okay. Yeah, you should be able to hear me now. I want to show y'all my fancy new lights. I haven't really figured out the whole like backdrop set thing yet, but um, that's why I'm looking all in living color because I got these fancy lights. You know what I'm saying? Um, so I'm ready to talk about February. January is not over. Today is the last day, and it's going on forever. And I just really wish it would be over. It's been a great month, but it's been intense and a lot of changes. So let's talk about February. Um, and I am going to start with the big picture events of February. And I have my phone here because on my phone, I have, I don't know if you can see this. Let me see. On my phone here, I have all of the major events. So the dark purple is like uh, the major transits and configurations. So you see, what is this? The week of the 12th, it's like a straight purple line all the way across. What that means is that every day that week there's some significant astrological configuration, sign change, or something happening. So let's start with the big picture, and then we'll go down kind of week by week and the things that I think you guys should know about. And of course, if you want details on these events, you definitely want to be following me on Twitter and follow the People's Weekly Forecast, because it is in that weekly tweet thread that I break down the details of each astrological event that's happening each day. And I really try to give guiding questions so that you can apply it to your life and not just tell you that the moon is in Aries, so don't go fight. Like, that's not really useful. But you all know that by now. All right, big picture of February. Number one, February 15th is the last eclipse in the Leo Aquarius eclipse pair, sign pair. That's what I'm trying to say. Leo Aquarius sign pair. And as always, we have got to contextualize every event into the bigger picture cycle, because otherwise it doesn't really mean anything. So this eclipse cycle of eclipses in Leo and Aquarius began in 2015. August and September of 2015 is a really good starting point for this pair of eclipses. And Leo and Aquarius is a really interesting sign pair. I love Twitter because everyone has such strong opinions about astrology and about different signs. And as an astrologer, it's really important for me to withhold any kind of moral or value judgment on signs, because, you know, any sign could be crazy as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to Leo and Aquarius, those are two signs that people have strong opinions about. Now, when we're talking about eclipses, though, these are not personality traits. These are not characteristics or your personal opinion about what Leo is. We are talking about the planets that rule any particular sign where eclipses are occurring. And eclipses occur in the same sign for about 19 months. So, Leo and Aquarius is really about our solid sense of self and identity. And the Leo side is about the external validation that we receive for our self concept, and Aquarius is about self determination. So, both of these signs are really concerned with establishing and maintaining. I wouldn't say establishing, I would say maintaining a self concept. Now, in the collective, the sun rules Leo, and so the sun is always going to be talking about how my bow came loose, so it didn't. The sun is going to be talking about men. It's going to be talking about our leaders. It is going to be talking about those people who have power and influence, whether those are celebrities, presidents, prime ministers, any type of leaders, specifically those who identify as male. All right. So we are going to see, or have seen, really fascinating stories and dynamic changes with regard to prominent male figures in our culture. And Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And Saturn, this is a really fascinating thing because Saturn is, when it comes to Aquarius, is about self determination. And what I mean by that is this rejection of external validation, meaning that I don't need you to validate my self concept. And when you do, I'm kind of skeptical and I may tend to reject or rebel against your need or desire or attempts to validate me. So I call Leo the sign of I am, and I call Aquarius the sign of I am not. Or, yeah, I am not. So these signs have been where the eclipses have been since about August or September of 2015, and February 15th is the last one. And so, how I've been talking about this with my clients and on Twitter is this sense of passing the baton. This last eclipse is finishing up a story. And when I say finish, it doesn't mean that you just throw away the circumstance, the relationship, the event. Maybe you do throw away the relationship, but the particular circumstance or topic does not leave your life. It is passing the baton and recontextualizing a particular event. So, say that you have had relationship issues and you've been dealing with your self concept and how your relationships either validate your self concept or they alert you to some need to change in that regard. We are passing the baton now and less concerned with our self concept, more concerned with security. And that's because the eclipses are moving into Cancer and Capricorn. Well, they have, and that was February 12th of 2017. So that's one of the big picture things. The other big picture thing is that all of January, we have been watching the Sun, Venus, and Mercury transit through Capricorn and triggering the degrees where Mars will station retrograde and direct this summer. And it's been triggering the degrees where we have already had eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn, and the degrees where we will be having eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn this year. So when I talk about triggering, what I'm really saying is that as every time a planet moves through a particular portion of the zodiac with some type of significance like an eclipse or a retrograde or a major planet like Jupiter or Saturn, these planets create a groove in this part of the zodiac. And so that every single time a planet comes through this part of the zodiac, it is walking through this groove and it's digging it deeper and establishing a precedent in our lives. Now, if you've been following me on Twitter, you know that one of my keywords for 2018 is unprecedented. And that is because the majority of us, including millennials and some Gen Xers, were not alive for the last time that there was a Mars retrograde in Capricorn. And so for us, this is unprecedented. There is no other Mars retrograde that we can look back to in our lives to tell us about what we are experiencing and what we can expect. And so when we use a word like unprecedented, what I'm really saying is that these things that are happening are brand new. These things are not happening to return you to a specific state or circumstance that you've been in your life. These events that happen in correlation to the time frames of Mars retrograde, as well as when planets trigger these degrees prior to the actual retrograde, these events and circumstances are brand spanking new. So if you've been waiting for an opportunity to change, if you've been waiting for circumstances to come to carry you to a new phase in your life where you can kind of leave behind certain patterns or jobs or relationships or whatever it may be, this is the time to do that. Now, with Capricorn, there is always a caveat, and I'm going to get to that shortly, but I do want to make sure that I cover all of the big picture stuff before I get further into details here. So let me go to the week view on my calendar. Let's see. How do I do this? I can't even remember. Week. There we go. All right. Let's see. All right. So big picture stuff. We talked about the eclipses and the last eclipse in the Leo Aquarius sign pair. Planets will be moving through Aquarius this month, and they will be triggering or transiting over these deep grooves that have been set by the Leo Aquarius eclipses over the past 2 years. So as planets transit through Aquarius, and that means the Sun, Venus, and Mercury primarily, Uh, they will be triggering specifically the August 21st, 2017 eclipse degree, which is at 4 degrees. And they are going to be triggering, I believe it was 13 degrees Aquarius last February 2017 or March. And then they are going to be triggering that 3 degree of Aquarius, which is where the eclipse is on February 15th. So again, we are passing the baton on to a different area of our chart. We are reaching a culmination and sometimes a dramatic ending of what we were dealing with during the February, pardon me, the Leo Aquarius eclipses over the past 2 years. Let's see. What else is happening here? Oh, Black Panther. That's also happening in February. And that's fascinating too, because that actually happens the day after the eclipse. Um, so that's really kind of cool, the timing of that. I think that's really it. There is only one lunation in February. A lunation is a new moon or full moon, and that is the new moon in Aquarius on the 15th. So because February is short, we only get one lunation. January, we doubled up. We got a lunation on the first of the month. I believe it was like the 17th of the month, and now we're on the 31st with another lunation. So now let's talk about the details of this month, and we're going to go week by week. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about the fact that today there is a full moon lunar eclipse in Cancer. It is at 17 degrees. And let me tell you why this is a big deal. 17 degrees is one of those hot points this year, just like last year 4 degrees Leo was. Last year there was an eclipse at 4 degrees Leo, and that also happened to be where Mercury stationed direct at the beginning of September, and it also happened to be where Mercury and Mars reached a conjunction uh, as Mercury was stationing direct in September. So every time planets triggered that 4 degrees Leo or Scorpio or Aquarius or Taurus, because those are the fixed signs and they are making hard aspects to each other, we see events and progress regarding the stories of the Leo Aquarius eclipse. So uh, this year, it's not in Leo. And I said towards the end of last year that 2017 was about the fixed signs. So if you have fixed signs, it was all up in your business. But 2018, my friends, is about cardinal signs. So if you have Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn prominent in your chart, what this is saying is that this year is about change, dynamic change, big change, and shifts in your life. So you get to be at the center of attention and the center of everything that's going on this year. So 17 degrees Cancer is where the full moon eclipse is today. And this summer, in July and August, there will be a Mercury retrograde in Cancer. And this will happen from the end of July, and I believe Mercury stations direct on August 18th. Let me give you that date just to be on my P's and Q's. Yes, Mercury 18th. Mercury stations direct at 17 degrees of Cancer. So, what is happening in your Cancer house? What is happening in your life right now? What is happening across the Cancer Capricorn axis in your chart? Is coming back and to be reckoned with and dealt with this summer when there's a Mercury retrograde in Cancer. All right. So let me get back to February here on my calendar. All right. Um, that's April. All right. So this Saturday, Venus and Jupiter square. Venus will be at 28 degrees Capricorn, and Jupiter will actually be at 28 degrees Libra. When we see a square, we are contextualizing that square into a larger cycle of two planets. So, if you recall back in November, there was a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in Libra. And that was a big deal because that only happens once every 12 years or so. Uh, so that conjunction began a new story in your Libra house, and it really kicked off what Jupiter in Libra has been about. Collectively, this has been about justice for women. This has been about fairness and equality and women coming together with a common cause, teaming up, to demand equality and fairness and justice. I mean, time's up God, that hashtag has the scales of justice as the emoji for it. So this is really a huge trend, and I've been coaching and consulting with my clients as well as people on Twitter about if you're a woman, if you do work that centers women, if your art, if you're writing, if whatever it is, if your work centers women, this is your year to amplify your work, to partner with other women, to have some mutual and beneficial uh, relationships and get your money. I mean, shoot. That's what Time's Up is doing. Time's Up is getting that money, okay? So take a hint and step on the trend because it's time. It's time. This is the year for that. So I'll talk about the details of that square actually probably tomorrow or Friday. Because it's a part of this week's the People's Weekly Forecast. So I'll get to the details of that, but just know that this square goes back to November 13th. All right, the second week of February, Venus enters Aquarius on February 6th. And if you have my 2018 Sidereal Astrology Guide, there's a typo. There's a lot of typos, but y'all are so flexible and so kind and bearing with me as I get myself together. And it'll be better next time, right? But it says Venus in Sagittarius in the People's, what is it? The 2018 Sidereal Astrology Guide. It says February 6 has Venus in Sagittarius, and it should be Venus in Aquarius. So this will be the first planet that will transit 4 degrees of Aquarius and 3 degrees of Aquarius, 13 degrees of Aquarius, all the degrees where there have been eclipses. And this is important because last year on February 13th, the Trump Russia case really got this big thing happening because Flynn, uh, uh, he quit. He resigned, was fired, whatever happened, right in the midst of all of these eclipses occurring and eclipses degrees being triggered back in February. So for sure, we will be getting some more news about that in your personal life. Just go back to 2015, what was happening. Go back to February and August of 2016, September too, and then go back to last year in August. What was the major story for you? And how has that progressed up to this point? All right. There is a Jupiter Sun square on February 9th. And this goes back to no, October 26th. That was the day that the Sun and Jupiter conjunct at 9 degrees of Libra. So this February on the 9th, the Sun will be at 27 Capricorn and Jupiter will be at 27 Libra. And the squares between Sun and Jupiter is really interesting to me, and I find myself kind of fascinated by it when I see it in clients' charts because there is this sense that one's perceptions are in conflict with the way that things fit together for you. And there is this sense that you cannot necessarily believe what you see, or your eyes are deceiving you, or your self concept conflicts with the story that you believe about you, who you are, and the story you believe about the way that the world works. So when we see that transit happening collectively, we can see or may possibly witness a conflict between this ongoing Jupiter and Libra story and the practical implications of what that means for leaders, for prominent men, right? That's what the sun often represents, but also for our own collective immersion in that topic and the conversations that we have. And we've already seen some pushback in people struggling to find nuance in that conversation. Um, but we'll talk about that more when we get there. Yeah, that's really interesting. The sun enters Aquarius on February 12th, and that is leading up to the full moon. No, it's a new moon solar eclipse on February 15th at 3 degrees of Aquarius. Now, that week that begins Monday, the 12th of February, every day that week there is something, with the exception of Friday. Well, actually, there is something Friday. But Monday, the 12th, the sun enters Aquarius. Tuesday, there's a Mercury Jupiter square. So you see, all of the planets are taking their turn squaring Jupiter. They all had their opportunity to conjunct Jupiter last year in the fall. And so now they're all taking turns square. So that story in your Libra house is illuminating some dissonance. And it is asking you to be innovative and creative and how you bridge the gap between Libra and Capricorn. And I'm going to talk about that, those two signs, in a minute after I finish telling you about that week. The 14th, which is Valentine's Day, Mercury enters Aquarius. The 15th, there is a new moon solar eclipse at 3 degrees of Aquarius. 16th, Black Panther debuts in theaters, and I've got my ticket. I'll be there at 10 a.m. All right, and then Saturday, February 17th, Mercury conjoins the sun at 4 Aquarius. So that's kind of a big deal because that 4 degrees of fixed signs is always triggering that massive total eclipse from August 21st, 2017, and all that Mercury Mars nonsense that reflected hurricanes and earthquakes and bombs and missiles from North Korea. I mean, the astrology was pretty literal that time. Okay, so let's talk about Capricorn and Libra and the square between those signs. Um, Mercury, I keep saying Mercury because that was the last planet that squares Jupiter and Libra from Capricorn, but I'm really trying to say Capricorn. Capricorn is a Saturn ruled sign. It's about conformism. It's about clear expectations and living up to those expectations. It's about hierarchies and meritocracy, meaning that ideally, we know it's not always the case, that you work hard for what it is that you want and you get good at it and you build up skills and you build up credibility and you become more responsible in your craft. And that allows you to gain responsibility and move up in the world. Meritocracy, right? And Libra is about consensus. It's about what we collectively agree to. It's about equality and fairness and justice. It's about social credibility and social currency. So when we have this square, fundamentally, there's a conflict between being practical and being rational. And practical and rationality or reason are not the same thing. Practicality is a materialist kind of view where you look at what is in front of you. You soberly assess what is. You don't conjecture about what may be. You say, all right, I've got $5. I don't know if I'm gonna get $5 more. So what can I do with what I have? Right? It's a awareness of one's limitations and what you're capable of. Reality, right? Not ideally, not the possibility of what could be. It's about what is. Now, Libra, on the other hand, is about rationality and Reason. Humans are unique in that one of our abilities is the ability to see things that are not as though they were. We can look at the landscape in front of us and we can see something that is not there. We can practice conjecture. We can suppose, right? We can use our faculties of reason and rationality to make things make sense, even though as things appear, there may not be any clues to what's really going on there. So this square is nuance as Libra as nuance, and Capricorn as this pragmatic, realist. Um, Now, in our own charts, this is a conflict, a dissonance, this grading up against between our own social currency, between our own demands for equality, fairness, and justice in our own lives. And wherever we have Libra in our chart, everyone has Libra somewhere. Even if you are not Libra rising, Libra sun, moon, Venus, Mercury, whatever, everyone has Libra in a specific chart of ours. And so wherever Libra is where we seek consensus. It's where we try to find what the most people agree to. It's where we may conform or adjust in order to balance things out. We may sacrifice our own ambitions for the sake of the team, for the sake of coming together. This is Libra. So everyone has that somewhere in their chart. If you're using whole sign houses, that sign is going to be somewhere. And depending on where that sign is, it can tell you a lot about yourself. You know, for Scorpio rising, Libra is in the 12th house. Well, the 12th house from any sign is sometimes called the undoing, or it is something that is polar opposite to the adjacent sign. So Libra and Scorpio are kind of opposites. You know, they are the most different from each other because Scorpio is about autonomy, emotional autonomy. You know, Scorpio wants to feel its feelings without having to consider other people. It wants to feel its feelings and have a sense of freedom without having to consider the feelings of other people. It wants to win, and it wants to win without having to consider other people. And Libra is like, well, actually, you got to consider other people. Well, actually, you are not the only one here. Now, both of those perspectives are needed depending on the context. Um, but that was just to illustrate for you that Libra is somewhere in everybody's chart and it has a meaning. So now, everyone has it someplace in their chart, and everyone has Capricorn somewhere in our chart. So for Capricorn, wherever that is in your chart, it's where you may experience resistance or things may take a long time to build. It's where you're focused on establishing a solid foundation. It's where it is hard for you to change because the structure is concrete and it's fixed in some ways. Capricorn is where we are admonished to work hard and be responsible. It's where we must mind our elders and tradition. And it is where it may become more alive after our Saturn return. After our Saturn return, that particular house, wherever Capricorn is, may take on a new tone and we may have more agency and control of that area of our life. So, this is where these squares are occurring because Jupiter's doing a long-term transit of your Libra house. And I've got a video on here somewhere that's talking about Libra and Jupiter and where it is in your chart. So you can go look at that. But just know during the beginning of February, planets are taking turns illuminating this square. So what that means is whatever began for you back in really October, November of 2017 is reaching a turning point in February. Uh, and those are the terms under which that's happening. Okay, um, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Aquarius, but before that, I just want to give you the last two major events of the month. That is on February 25th, Venus and Mars square. Venus will be at 23 Aquarius, excuse me, and Mars will be at 23 Scorpio. And if you recall, at the end of October of last year, and when I give these dates, I'm hoping that it rings a bell for you because you know, for most of us, we can remember when something significant happens for us. And so me providing these dates in the astrology is giving you a context and allowing you to kind of forecast and look ahead to see how these particular transits will affect you personally, okay? So at the end, I believe it was the end of October, beginning of November 2017, there was this huge mashup of Venus and Mars applying a conjunction in late Leo, around 27, 28 degrees or something like that. And they both took turns squaring Saturn, which was at the end of Scorpio. Saturn was getting ready to leave Scorpio for Sagittarius. So now at the end of February, and that is February 25th, Venus and Mars will square each other. So we are reaching a crisis point of that story. I think we're seeing another little theme emerge here in February that there are these crisis points and turning points. The eagerness with which we began things or things ended in the fall of 2017, they are reaching a point where we can kind of see things for what they are, with some clarity and kind of figure out for real what we're working with. So, with regard to this Venus and Mars square, um, Venus and Mars squares are tough. Venus and Mars conjunctions are tough. Just ask anybody who has them in their chart. But with a Venus and Mars square, there is a conflict between what you like, what you want, what you find beautiful, what your love language, and your personal autonomy. And there's always this adjustment and this need to kind of figure out how you can be in situations where you are validated um, in an emotional sense, where you can experience pleasure and joy and connect and bond with other people. And also, Mars, maintain your autonomy, feel a sense of freedom, uh, not having to ask for permission. So, that Venus and Mars square is illuminating those themes. So, if you think back to late October, and think about the revelations and clarity endings and things that occurred for you then, February 25th, and the days surrounding that are the turning point for that particular story. Um, yeah, and of note, that was actually that square with Saturn and the Venus Mars conjunction was actually when there was that massacre in Las Vegas. And the moon, like it began just at like a few minutes after the moon entered Aquarius and began triggering that whole Leo eclipse. So this month is going to bring back some of those stories. And then um, the last event of February is on the 28th of February, and that is Mercury square Mars. So February is the month of squares. So I'm going to do two things as I wrap up this video. I want to talk about the sign Aquarius because the planets are all transiting through that sign this month, and there's a major eclipse there, which is a end story. And then I'm going to talk about squares. I think that would be important. Let's do squares first, and then let's end with Aquarius. All right. So aspects are not these stationary things. They're dynamic, and they don't stand alone. Anytime we see a square, we know that at some point those two planets were conjunct, and that means they were at the same sign at the same degree. Okay? So when we see that square, the faster moving planet has overcome the slower moving planet at the conjunction, and it has progressed ahead of it through the zodiac. Now, not all planets are going to go through this whole cycle. Mercury and the Sun will never do that. Venus and Mercury will never do that because Mercury stays in this fixed position in relation to the ship to the Sun, as does Venus. Venus and the Sun will never be opposed. They will never be square, okay, because the Venus can only be 48 degrees from the Sun. So when we see a square between two planets, we know that at some point they were conjunct. So the square is, if this is the conjunction, the square is the faster moving planet. Now they're both moving, but the faster moving planet is going faster, obviously. And now it's gotten to the point where there's a square. So there are multiple squares this month. And as I do the weekly astrology forecast, I'm going to refer you guys back to the conjunctions that those were a part of. But the rest of that picture is that eventually these planets will be opposed to each other. The faster moving planet will again get ahead of that planet even further and be at opposition. And the planet that is slower moving now will kind of be where the faster moving planet was at the square. Okay, and then there's a final square before they conjunct again. So now all of these planets are doing their opening square. And I think that we can really see in our own lives, just in a bigger picture kind of way, that the fall, after we got through all the Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio stuff, um, October, well, November, December, so that's, I guess, fall, winter, um, was a lot of conjunctions, a lot of new beginnings, a lot of seeing that things are really changing and shifting, and we've moved out of a particular chapter and moving into a new chapter. And at this time, actually, there were conjunctions In January too, that was the Mars Jupiter, but that cycle's a little bit behind because of Mars coming up retrograde. So, anyways, my whole point being that now February takes on quite a different tone from October and November and December of 2017. February takes on the tone of squares. Now, some of us have squares in our natal charts, and it's not a death sentence, trust me. A square in your natal chart is not a death sentence, it's not the end of the world. Hard aspects like oppositions are not a death sentence. It's just not. And anyone who tells you that is doing you a disservice, and throw it away and, use some discernment to pick out what is of value from what that person says. Now, when we talk about a conjunction and then the square that follows, the conjunction means that these two planets' agendas are unified. It also means, I think, more importantly and more significantly, that both of those planets are answering to another planet. So, if we take Venus and Mars, for example, Venus and Mars were in Leo back in October of 2017, and they were both answering to the sun because the sun is the ruler, the governor at home, the king of the castle of Leo. Okay, so both of those planets were subservient to this other planet's agenda. Now, when we get to the square, though, the slower moving planet is in one planet's agenda, and the faster moving planet is in another planet's agenda. So, if we're talking about the Capricorn Libra square, all of the planets moving through Capricorn and squaring Jupiter, which is in late Libra, they are all answering to Saturn. And the Jupiter, of course, is continuing to answer to Venus because that is the ruler of Libra. So it's really a conflict, if you think about it, between Saturn and Venus, because those are the planets whose agendas are reigning supreme as these other planets take turn transiting through that sign. So Saturn and Venus aren't actually enemies. Saturn actually is exalted, has special privileges, is cultivated and cultured in Venus's sign, which is Libra. So they aren't exactly enemies in that sense. But it takes some effort to reconcile the difference between those two things. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll move on to Aquarius, and that'll be it. So this video is not 55 years long. Okay, so Saturn and Venus. Saturn, I like Saturn after my Saturn return. And I think that you will too after your Saturn return. After your Saturn return, Saturn becomes this thing that's not happening to you as much as this thing that you reckon with and you kind of take the reins and become in more ways than one. But Saturn is responsibility. It is sobriety. That's another one of my favorite words for Capricorn, um, as the sign where Saturn is at home. Sobriety is the clarity of mind, being under no illusions or being not under the influence of some substance, right? Sobriety is clear thinking. It's being able to see things as they are without something clouding your view. And Venus, on the other hand, isn't necessarily sober in that sense because Venus is always thinking about what other people think. It's always considering the consensus. It's always of the mind that I am a social creature and I need other people and I seek their validation and acceptance and the comfort and conveniences that make life enjoyable and pleasurable. Whereas Saturn can be quite toilsome, quite rigid, quite difficult to mold, thinking of marble or stone, and the effort and precision and sobriety it takes to work with that kind of medium. So that square, in any square, is asking us to reconcile things that are quite different, that don't have the same goal or agenda, that are not seeking the same outcome. So I hope that you can apply that to any squares in your chart. and be thinking about maybe even what was happening in your mother's life during her pregnancy when that conjunction occurred, right? Now, let's talk about Aquarius. Aquarius is another Saturn ruled sign. Aquarius is an air sign, and air signs aloof, detached, distant, but air as an element is rising above. What is it rising above? It is rising above the earth, right? So the solid realness of wood or mountains or soil, it is rising above emotions, right? It is objectifying. When we talk about objectivity, we're talking about objectifying. So it's taking this thing and seeing it as something separate from me, right? Um, so, as an air sign, that is some of the basic qualities of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius, as I've said many times on Twitter, is one of the most misunderstood signs. And for a variety of reasons, primarily that modern astrology associates Aquarius with Uranus. And I don't know exactly where or how the significations or meaning of Uranus came about. I'd have to ask Sam Reynolds um, or somebody else because I don't know. Pull it out of thin air. I don't know. But all of that to say that, excuse me, that uh, Aquarius is not the purple haired hippie. Aquarius is not kumbaya, heal the world, let's all be free, let's all come together and go to Woodstock. Like, this is not Aquarius. I guess pop culture in the 70s had a lot to do with that too, in the age of Aquarius and all of that stuff. But um, Aquarius is not any of these things. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. And my key word for Aquarius is self determination, personal sovereignty, um, understanding that there is an innate sense of your personal power and authority, and over yourself, though, not out in the world. Capricorn is about it out in the world. So, Aquarius is saying in some ways that I answer to no one, right? And if I decide to answer to someone, it is because of a choice that I've made to do that. My sovereignty is my birthright. My uh, ability to determine for myself my own limitations is my birthright. The idea of establishing boundaries that maintain clarity of your self concept is very Aquarius, right? It's saying that I don't need you to validate me. I did a thread talking about those statements that Erica Badu made last week, and I took a look at her chart, and she's got a couple planets in Aquarius. She might even be Aquarius rising. I know that I've heard her say that she's Pisces rising in tropical, so I'm not sure if that moves back to Aquarius in sidereal, but she has all the marks of it. Rejecting this concept of groupthink and feeling on red alert anytime she feels herself following along or accepting what other people say as truth or as some kind of self defining factor. I mean, she definitely pushes back against that in her work as well as in her interviews and her politics that we've heard her talk about. In some ways, she relishes in having unpopular opinions. Um, that don't necessarily lead to eccentricism, which is what a lot of people associate with Aquarius, right? Some of her beliefs are very traditional, they're very old school. So I think that says a lot about some of our misunderstanding of Aquarius and this idea that, it seeks to buck trends or, um, hey Ezra, I see you. I was thinking about you too as I was talking about this. Um, but as I was saying, the eccentricism that people often associate with Aquarius, I think of Aries as actually the sign that is the most rebellious and eccentric. I mean, it's Mars. Come on, Mars is not about following nobody's rules. Mars is like, get up off me. I don't need you. You know, I don't need you to tell me anything. I don't need your permission. Um, it's not going to ask for it. It's going to push back against. It's taking the charge and pushing things ahead. And so Aquarius is really not about that trend setting. Um, it's about sitting in this space of feeling empowered to determine for oneself who oneself is, one's limitations in that regard. Um, so I've got a lot of threads on Aquarius. I'm going to retweet them when I get off here. Um, that is the end of this forecast. I do want to share a couple things before I go. I've been on a couple podcasts recently. Tarot Bites, which is the Tarot Ladies podcast, and I talked about some of the differences between tropical and sidereal astrology, and I also broke down Chinese astrology and kind of some of the concepts that hold that up. And so I will be offering Chinese astrology readings in February. My goal is to have it up on my booking website by my birthday, which is February 6th. So if you've been waiting for that, and that process is going to be a little bit different. Um, Eventually, I'm going to require an intake form for all of my clients. But for this particular reading, I definitely need an intake form because there's a lot of prep that goes into Chinese astrology readings. Um, so the other thing is that I have two events coming up. One is February 24th, and it's here in Chicago, and it's with Haji Healing Salon. And there's going to be a tea, three flight tea, a vegetarian brunch, and a curated discussion on the role of self care in social media. So if you're here in Chicago and you want to see me and get a reading in person, get your ticket for that at hajihealingsalon.com. I'll retweet that and share that, maybe put it in the link of this or description of this video. I'll be doing 20-minute tarot and astrology readings at this event. And I think it's going to be really nice. The last thing is that my next webinar is on February 25th, and that is going to be on the houses. And I'm really excited about this because the ways that the meanings of the houses have come about is actually a little bit complex. And I really hope to lay down a solid conceptual framework so that you can come to see why Aries does not equal the first house. And I hate that. It's just not true. Aries has absolutely nothing to do with the first house unless you are Aries rising. Mars has absolutely nothing to do with the first house unless you are Aries rising or Scorpio rising, or you happen to have Mars in the sign of your ascendant. Okay, so I'm going to break all of that down, and as always, I'm going to be pushing back against these stereotypes and these myths that have been perpetuated by the man in astrology. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so that is February 25th on Sunday, and you can register for that now on my website. Um, the registration will likely be open until probably the 21st of February. So, yeah, that's all I got. This month is going to be really interesting, and I'm really interested in seeing how all of the squares are going to manifest collectively and individually, excuse me, this month, because that seems to be kind of the dominant theme. So that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And next time, I'm going to try for a new background. I meant to say, this shirt that I'm wearing, okay, this is like this really beautiful purple silk uh, pussy bow tie top. In supporting Black owned businesses and in supporting women owned businesses, go to YouTube, not YouTube, Instagram. Go to Instagram, shop vintage boutique. So that's Bowttique. I got this lovely shirt and many other amazing vintage items. This one still had the tags on it, okay? 100% silk top. Um, Go to Shop Vintage Boutique and check her out on Instagram. She uploads a bunch of stuff every day, that it's really reasonably priced. I think this was like $22 plus shipping. So if you're looking for some vintage items, some nice things that will keep you looking fly in 2018, go to that black owned business, women owned business shop vintage boutique. I meant to say that. All right, that's all I got. You guys take care. Enjoy the rest of your Monday and don't let this eclipse take you out. Take a nap.